Hello and welcome everybody to another attributed session brought to you by Dream Data. As usual, it's me, I'm Stefan. With me today, I have Alice de Courcy. Many people must struggle with getting that right on the first draft, Alice, today. Some would probably call this a pretty narrow topic, which is how to use OKRs specifically inside a marketing team. But it's a topic that I've been quite interested in for a while now, as I don't by any means perceive myself as the perfect leader, the perfect marketing leader. So I'm trying to learn, is there any better ways to structure how our team works? And Alice, just to brag a little bit on your behalf before I give you the word, I just saw that you've been at Cognism from 3 million ARR to over 70 million ARR now, which is an insane accomplishment and probably makes you one of the most successful European SaaS companies, right? So I'm super happy that you've said yes to teach me a little bit about how you lead marketing teams, I guess, particularly in Cognism, and how you make the work of your employees become a success. But Alice, for those who've never met you or heard about Cognism, can you maybe explain a little bit about who you are and what it is Cognism does?
Yeah, sure. First of all, great pleasure to be here. Love talking about OKRs and anything that's around structure and process. So excited for this topic. I'm Alice de Courcy. I'm CMO at Cognism. Cognism is a B2B contact data provider. We give the sales teams the contact data they need in order to find their next best prospect in a nutshell. I've been at Cognism now for coming up to 6 years, which is kind of crazy when I think about it. And yes, happy to say I've scaled quite a lot past the 70 million as well now, which is exciting. Excited to dig into the topic with you.
Wonderful. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like I see Cognism everywhere on LinkedIn, and I'm really enjoying the approach that you guys take to marketing, which plays on a good deal of a sense of humor. But for those who have never heard about or seen Cognism's marketing, what is the overall brief that you've given to your team about how Cognism looks and feels?
Yeah, I think important to say that I feel like, well, especially when I started at Cognism, that B2B marketing was kind of broken. I think a lot of like the first principles of what we were taught about B2B marketing should look and feel like just didn't really resonate with me or feel to be true. So when I joined Cognism, I felt like it was a great opportunity to kind of reinvent the playbook, so to speak. And we always talk about how we don't want to copy anyone else. We're trying to forge our own path. We're building in public. We are trialing, failing, experimenting all the time. We want to be super authentic. We want to talk like humans. We want to, take inspiration from B2C. We're talking to people at the end of the day. It might well be that they sit in a business setting, but they're still just normal people. They enjoy the same things as people in a consumer environment as well. And so a lot of those things are part of what we've put into the DNA at Cognism, which I think is hopefully what's helping to drive a lot of the success and why people can kind of, relate to a lot of the stuff that we're doing.
It's super nice, and I can just say to the people listening that if you want inspiration on how to do marketing in a B2B world a little bit more exciting, then do go follow Alice and Cognism.
Amazing.
But like diving into today's topic of OKRs, objectives and key results, just to spell it out, when did you first discover it, and like when did you start thinking that it's not only just a good way to lead a product team but also a marketing team?
Yeah, actually, I was first introduced to the OKR framework in my previous organization. We actually spoke about them before we came online, Jury, who were like at that time a startup. They're probably more in a scale-up phase at the moment. But I joined as the first commercial hire, and it was literally the CEO and myself sitting in their London office. And we had all of the product and engineering team sitting remotely. So OKRs were a really pivotal framework for us as a company that small, starting out completely the go-to-market motion and trying to get us super aligned with product as well. So I really discovered their utility in that sense of like startup mode, us all working more on an organizational level. I didn't have a team, so it was more about just like org level OKR framework. But the things that I learned that were very important was the structure around it. I guess also just like how to set OKRs. So there's a lot of do's and don'ts around that as well. And so when I got to Cognism, we didn't actually have, I think in the first year and year and a half, probably it was just doing a lot of stuff, getting stuff done, shipping it. And then it became a requirement to have more structure, especially because we became remote with COVID, etc. So that was when I thought about implementing OKRs into the marketing organization, but they weren't company-wide at that stage. It's only been a company-wide, I guess, way of operating for the last year and a half. But yeah, I'd say for marketing, we've been using them for a couple of years now.
That's really cool. And maybe if we start from scratch, for people who've never heard about OKRs before, how would you explain it to a general marketer? What the objectives are, what are the key results, and so forth?
Yeah, so OKRs are ultimately, they're a goal-setting framework. But the thing that's unique about OKRs is they're set up to be ambitious, measurable, and trackable. And when they work the best, they should be applied across like the full organization at both a team and individual level. That's how I see them working best. And you've got and they're a combination of being outcome focused and output focused, depending on the level within the OKR framework you're operating on. So it's really important that you have that structure set from like the beginning as well. I think, I guess that's kind of in a nutshell what an OKR is there to achieve. And in Cognism, to give you an example of how it's set up, is like, first of all, my exec team will set the top level OKRs for the company, which are a bit tied into our strategy. We do that on a half-yearly basis. So, and it's not to say that we'll reset them every 6 months. We'll just relook and revisit. And if something has changed and one of those OKRs doesn't look to be something that we want to focus on going forwards, that's when we'll iterate. And we have 4 OKRs. That's the maximum amount that I would recommend. And that's the maximum amount that we would ever allow ourselves to have.
We have 4 in the company.
4 company level OKRs.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. More in marketing, which I'll go into later because of the way that that's structured. And then in those sessions, what happens with the execs is once we're happy that those OKRs are the right things to be focusing on, each of the department heads will go away and set their department level OKRs based on those top level 4 OKRs the organization has, or they'll just revisit the ones they already have, depending on like if we're revisiting or reimagining. And at that point, that's when we'll all come back together, and everyone from the CFO, the CEO, the CPO will all talk to our OKRs that we're going to focus on from a department level, how we see them rolling up into the organization level ones, and why we think that will help us move the needle. And at that point, like, we are challenged, and people will have open discussion about, are those the right ones? We'll talk about dependencies across departments. Like, it's a very like open forum. It normally takes a whole afternoon for us to do this.
Yeah.
And at that point, we hope we've like solidified down what the companies are and our department levels are, and that we're happy that they all align. And if we do all of those things well, then the strategy will get executed. And that's when we then go away and take them back to our teams. And at that point, I will do a similar session with my org where I'll say, these are company level, department level, and now I want you to go away and think about what your functional level OKRs are going to look like that are going to feed into these. And so that's when they will go off. And this is when there's quite a lot of work that has to happen. You need to be willing to kind of get very involved and roll up your sleeves into the details here for them to build their OKRs based off those things. And I would say that's the most challenging level of the whole thing, but it's also the most important because that's where all the work gets done.
It's really interesting it seems very admirable how you guys do it, but I bet there's probably a bit of uncomfort in that leader group trying to explain to the other departments what they do. And I know I can get a little bit protected because the others, they don't get marketing as well as I do. And you need to kind of explain them why is it that we believe the things we do believe. But I also think at the end of the day, it's also a very healthy exercise being able to explain the other leaders of the company why it is these things that we choose to do and not the other things. And I guess also like just interpreting a little bit, it must also create some buy-in from everybody that these are the right strategies from our company for our company, and we'll try to support you the best way we can.
100%. It makes yes. I would say in that initial meeting, you have to be prepared for some uncomfortable conversations to defend your point of view, but also be open to being wrong.
Yeah.
And then it's like a healthy conversation. And from there, the work is a lot easier because when it comes to like other meetings, so say our RevOps quarterly meeting or whatever it may be, and there's people are asking about why we haven't done this, and that, and you can say, well, as per our agreed OKR, this is where we are focusing our energy and our efforts, and that leads up into the overall company strategy. And so those framing conversations in that way then becomes easier in like the day-to-day and the weekly. I think you have to have like a little bit of that painful conversation up front, but then it does get easier.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So like in that process, it sounds like you kind of come with the first draft for the department OKRs and then show it to the rest of the leadership team. And once there's kind of green light, then it transfers to being a conversation between you and your team.
Yes, exactly. And we have lots of different functions within the team, and they will have different OKRs. So for example, product marketing, customer marketing, demand gen, paid, content marketing. They will then take what I present as the department level, and then they'll use those to frame what they're going to have as their OKRs for their individual functions, which should ladder up. But there'll be some things that aren't connected directly to an OKR, and that's okay. But mostly they'll ladder up.
Wow. Okay. And does it work on an individual basis, or is it like a team basis?
They're team based, and then they also have individual focused OKRs. So there is like a two kind of tier part to this. The team based OKRs are really what we report on the department level, and then their performance reviews are run on the individual OKRs.
Okay. And is it like is it always a top-down framework, or can it go from the individual employees up to company-wide OKRs?
It is really top-down from a framework perspective. I mean, sometimes the timing doesn't always align, and we don't want to be operating without OKRs or with out-of-date OKRs. And in those senses, I will encourage teams to kind of directionally come up with a line of thought that makes sense based on what we know to be true and like that we know exist in the world, like from a strategy perspective. So right now is quite a good example. We're starting to think about 2025 planning. We haven't done the exec level 2025 OKR framework yet. So the team are thinking about it and like getting themselves into a position where hopefully what they'll have to do is more of an iteration versus like a starting from scratch once we've done the exec level. So I think there is like you can kind of have the two paths running a little bit in parallel, and one can start a bit sooner than the other, just so that we don't get held up by, exec calendars and things.
Yeah, that makes sense. To develop a little bit for those who are hearing about OKRs for the first time, what could be some typical marketing objectives in your team, and what could be some typical key results, and how does those two work together?
Yeah, like I can give you a great example of like an OKR that's gone well. So the objective was that we wanted to, so how it started, strategic objective for the company level was we want this proportion of pipeline to be ICP and this proportion of pipeline to be non-ICP from a compensation perspective. That was the top level strategy. Then from a department level, my objective was that we want to improve the composition of marketing source pipeline in relation to ICP. And the key result that was tied to that was hit, I won't say the exact percentage, but X% of dollars of marketing pipeline from mid-market plus organizations. And the thing that was great about this OKR was that could be department level, and then it was really easily slotted into each of the functions. So for example, paid content, SEO, demand gen, even our enablement teams with website. And when we got into the functional level OKRs that fed into that objective, it was like it broke down all the silos, and it just got us all talking about the same exact thing. And it meant that whenever someone was tasked with something, the first question they would say is like, well, is that going to help us achieve that OKR or not? And if it's not, then should we either do it or not, or should we change it so that it does?
Yeah.
And like those were the types of questions that it's really hard to get your team to ask in relation to tasks, unless you have like an OKR framework that's like driving that sort of decision making.
Yeah.
So I'd say, yeah, that's an example of one. That's how it works in practice, and it's been pivotal for us in terms of actually succeeding and changing that direction.
Yeah, and as I say, I think as you said, I think one of the things that does really well is it helps teams also just mentally with themselves answer questions really quickly. Does it align with the OKR or not? If it doesn't align with that, well, maybe you shouldn't spend time on it right now, or at least go double check with whoever is your manager that it's the right path that you're taking right now.
And I would say, like, I always call it the 80-20 rule, which is like 80% of our focus should be on the core strategy, like the stuff that sits within the OKRs and the things that we know are driving towards what's the core of our focus. And then there should be this like 20%, which is the other stuff. And we need to have the 20% because we are in a scale up where we learn really fast, stuff comes up all the time, and we can't iterate strategy quickly enough to kind of put it into the framework. But if you leave 20% capacity for that other stuff, it means that you're not constantly having to like reinvent the wheel or feel like you're operating outside of the system. You still have that like headspace. And it also encourages the team to get really comfortable with that, knowing that there will be some other things that happen that aren't in the OKR framework, but they're still important. And that's where we're testing fast, iterating, learning, failing, all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a supplementary kind of framework to the OKRs? Because a big part of marketing is also did the sales team get the demo request they needed last week, or all these things that we just want to have happening every single week. Are they kind of stuffed into another framework, or kind of I think you call them business as usuals in another setting? How does these two play together?
That's just BAU. It's what I would call like, that's just our job, right? That's what we have to do. We're here as a marketing team to make sales easier. And by making sales easier, that's hitting the revenue targets and the pipeline goals. And so anything like that, so the core metrics that go into achieving that, which is the full funnel from demo request all the way through, that's just like doing our job and making sure that that's all happening as it should be. And then the OKRs are supplemental to that, which is like, how do we ensure we can help drive change forward to either improve that or to do something slightly differently? So yeah, that's how I see it.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. For the objectives and key results, how ambitious do you allow them to be? As kind of, are we tripling our revenue this quarter, or is it do we do 20% better than last quarter? Or how do you approach this kind of goal setting or ambitions level built into these?
Yes. Well, I would say like because the revenue and pipeline targets are set, and that's again like the BAU, that's the stuff that we just have to achieve. The ambition around it will be different things. It would be like the composition of that pipeline, or that the ABM program is driving better ROI, or one channel is improving upon previous performance. There would be those types of things, and I always want them to be as ambitious as they think is possible. A lot of those OKRs are set on things that we might not have a lot of data on. So the way that I kind of manage people's fear, I suppose, of failure when it comes to being ambitious in OKR setting is that, like, we know we don't have all the data. We're going to have a best guess based on the benchmarks and the data that we do have. But what I will say is that we can revisit the actual like key result that we're driving towards once we've collected like enough data, so kind of 3 months so of data. But the thing that really matters, and that's because I want us to be ambitious, and we should be failing fast, and we should be learning quickly, and I don't want to be worried about that, because that makes people, I think that just drives the bad culture. And so if they know that the key result is not something they're handcuffed towards, it's just directional, and that we're going to really be looking in our monthly status updates and our quarterly status updates on the OKR at what are those leading indicators. And as long as we're making progress towards those, then maybe the data was off at the beginning and the key result was wrong, but like we still have like made progress on the OKR, and that's the main thing. So it's like striking that balance between saying it's not obviously we don't want them to think it's okay to have like all of their OKRs fail, but equally, if the key result isn't exactly right from like that one data point that we had to like bake it into, then it's okay, and we can revise it and revisit it. So that's the way that we kind of try and manage it, and we track progress on them on a monthly basis and a quarterly basis as well, so we can quickly kind of iterate if we think that we're miles off track, and we have more data now to kind of tell us that we need to change course a little bit.
That's wonderful. My next question was kind of how you track kind of the progression towards these, but you almost covered all of it. Do you run this? It's kind of, is it something you run in sheets, and then people, the different kind of stakeholders, they go in and update how they progress, and kind of what are I guess it's the key results need to have some kind of measurability to it, so it's not just an opinion.
All have to be measurable, like that's one of the key things. I think there's 3 things that I found really difficult with OKR setting when we started out, which was like really painful to get started with, for that point around like what even is a key result, what ticks the box of that being something that we are deemed to be fit for a key result. And it is that idea that it has to be measurable in some way. So we have to go through and make sure every single person has a key result that's measurable and trackable, and that we know how we're going to get to the answer on that. Then they also have to be monitored so closely, because people have to be held accountable. Otherwise it all fails and doesn't work. That's hard when you scale and you have a larger team as well. And then finally, visibility. Because if you don't have visibility into how all of the OKRs ladder up and feed into each other, then we kind of lost the point of the OKR framework. So what we found was that actually it didn't really work when we managed it in Excel or in Sheets or in PowerPoint. It just got really painful, because they were all disparate all over the place from the different levels, and then different departments stored in different places, and it didn't work. So we implemented goals in Asana, so that we could track the OKRs across company, department, functional, individual level, all within Asana. You can see the hierarchy of it. And then the great thing is you can attach your projects to each of the goals as well. So it's really easy to do that. So as a project progresses that goes against the goal, and it can have key milestones as well, that's all feeding in automatically into that goal within Asana. And so you can see that visibility really easily, and it's like literally like probably a 5-minute job to update the status of that OKR on a monthly basis. We just say, if it's an on track, you don't actually have to add any description. On a monthly basis, if it's off track, then you do. And then on a quarter, you would update the status and also give description into like where you're progressing against the key result. But most of that should all be automated within Asana, because you can connect, we can connect Salesforce data into it and things like that as well.
Wow. It sounds like an impressively tight ship that you guys run. How big a thing is this on a day-to-day basis? Is it like something you talk about every day in your conversations, or is it more like a weekly or a monthly check-in with your employees?
I'd say it's weekly, monthly, and quarterly. So they do weekly status updates, which feed into the OKRs and how they're progressing. Then the monthly, we just got off our monthly all hands for marketing now, and how that's structured is each team gives an update. The OKR progress is part of that update as well. And then it also sits in parts of our like sprints planning for each of the functions. So when we're doing a sprint, because this is how I kind of like to think about things, is that OKRs are a set of frameworks that allows us to stay focused, but we still need to make sure that we're executing the right actions on a daily, weekly basis, that are the right things to drive us towards that OKR. So that's where sprints come in really handy. And in the sprints, that's when we'll say, okay, well, what's this task driving towards from an OKR perspective? And that will make sure we're holding ourselves accountable, that we're doing the right initiatives every week to drive towards the longer term OKR.
So let me just to spell it out. What's a sprint then in this system?
A sprint is really like we do them bi-weekly, where we get together as a function. So say it's
Okay.
demand gen, we're doing a demand gen bi-weekly sprint. Those are the tasks and the projects that sit within the OKR, really. They're the things that should be driving us towards it. But like if we know, for example, I'm looking at a dashboard and it looks like we're really tracking behind on NAM to NAM pipeline, might be that, that doesn't really go, that's just business as usual work. And it doesn't really tie into an OKR, but we need to just really focus on that problem because again, that's our number one thing that we should be doing, is hitting those pipeline and revenue goals. So we would make sure that we're saying, okay, for this couple of weeks, we're deprioritizing this, this, and this to prioritize hitting pipeline, and these are the things we're going to do to get there.
Nice. So it's like a 2-week framework where you kind of, okay, we're here today, and in 2 weeks we've done what we agree here today.
Yeah, exactly.
And the overall OKRs, I forgot to ask, you said you do them like biannually, so kind of those that you select then goes for 6 months?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's not that we necessarily have to reset them at the end of the 6-month period either. It's a revisitation. So it depends if we've changed. If one of the company level OKRs has changed, then for sure we will need to either we'll probably add and remove some OKRs in our own department level and functional level.
Yeah.
If the company level ones haven't changed, then it's more about making sure that the ones that we're focused on are the right ones, and that we're also measuring and tracking them correctly. That's more of the review that happens. So it just depends how the company level ones move as to really how much change happens in the department and functional ones.
Super cool. Who do you think, what type, is there any specific type of companies where you think OKRs is a good fit? And are there any companies that should probably not jump into using OKRs as a way to lead the company?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about from a marketing perspective, I suppose if you're the kind of organization where you don't have very good measurement in place in terms of tracking, like how marketing's performing, and you also don't have very good oversight or visibility into like company level objectives, then I think it's going to be very difficult to do OKRs. That's not to say you still shouldn't do it. I think it's just going to make it much harder to do. I also think it's not really so much as there's a type of company where it's not a fit. I think OKRs as a function and a structure are always going to be helpful. I think it just depends on what I guess it depends on what your priorities are. So as an example, if you're a small startup and you're a team of 5 and you're all sat in the office together, you probably don't need OKRs. It's probably going to be more work than is beneficial in the early days when you just want to get a lot of stuff done. Yeah. I think when you realize that actually you're getting a lot of stuff done, but you're not sure if it's the right stuff, and you're not entirely sure how it's laddering up to the organizational structure, then that's when you should be thinking, okay, we probably do need to have some sort of framework in place, and OKRs can be a good one for enabling us to get that structure that we need. And I would say just because you can't measure it doesn't mean you shouldn't be. But you probably want to solve the measurement problem before you started to do OKRs.
That's a really good way of putting it. If you're doing a lot of stuff, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's the right stuff, or if it's moving in the same direction.
Yes.
That's great. Have you met any kind of resistance trying to implement the OKRs amongst your employees? So what are the typical what have you experienced, and kind of what is the best way to introduce employees who haven't worked with this before, and where can trouble kind of start?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think people always want to understand how they're feeding into the company strategy, but then they also want to understand how they can be successful as individuals. So a way to overcome any possible friction is to make sure that you very clearly outline how the OKR process will enable them both to have a transparency into the company strategy and how their work feeds into it, but then also to help them as individuals succeed within the company and in their own careers. So I think framing it in those two ways really helps, because that's the sort of feedback you tend to get from employee engagement surveys when people say, oh, we don't really know how my work helps the company strategy, and I also don't feel like I'm working towards that. Really helps if you set the scene there. You're going to get friction at the beginning around people just not knowing how to do OKR setting. And there'll be a lot, you have to be ready and expect a lot of back and forth on that. And to understand that you're going to need to like handhold a lot to get to a really good place with the OKRs. For example, people will set key results that aren't really key results. They'll set objectives that aren't outcome focused, and some of them you might not think really align. So you'll have to do a lot of that work and just be right. And people will find that frustrating because they always do. Something new is always hard to get to grips with. And then I think another really important thing is that, like, if you're committing to this, then you need to commit to the reporting and the accountability side of it, and having a process where you constantly revisit it, because otherwise people will be frustrated that they're doing work to, update OKRs that just sit in a deck or sit in an Excel that are never really reviewed, or they don't really know what happens to it and how that like feeds into anything. So I think you have to have the process and the cadences sorted around how you're going to, how you're going to keep people accountable to that and talk to progress on OKRs and things as well.
Yeah, like if you've come from a culture where you're not used to kind of being measured or committing to certain goals or projects, I understand that it can, for those people, it can be uncomfortable to suddenly be confronted with a leader who keeps referring to that project that you agreed to do. And related to this, let me just pull up Andy's question here. How about if you have creatives on the team? How would you set key results for them?
Yeah, we have OKRs and key results for everyone within the organization, including our design team and our video team. And I think the one thing I would say on this is you have to be understanding that their business as usual work is more consuming than other functions. So like I guess they're going to have a smaller amount of OKRs, which is more of the transformative stuff that you want to focus them on, outside of what they do just in BAU, which is enabling the rest of the team to do the things that they're going to ultimately deliver results through. But then I want to push every team to do better. So example for the creative team is we have what we call like a creative day once a quarter, where we look at the performance of all of our ads and creatives that we can track, and we'll say these are the things that are performing really well, these are the things that are performing less well, and when we can set benchmarks on the creative side, that we want to make sure that we never fall below X, and we continue to hold ourselves accountable to Y. And that really pushes two things. It means that the creative team understand how their work actually has an direct impact on pipeline and revenue. Like a single ad that performs really well can have a massive impact. And then it also makes them think about what are the elements and the things in that ad that made it work. Obviously, some of it's copy, some of it's where that ad might, like the subject of the ad, but some of it is also design and creative. And I want them to be thinking in that way as well, so that they're not just executing a brief. And it changes the way that they operate on like a day-to-day basis, because when they have briefs, they should be incorporating kind of those learnings into that execution as well. So getting them to be a bit more strategic in how they're thinking about things. And another example is in the video team, our video lead has now like really got like created a kind of YouTube strategy that we didn't have before, all driven through the OKRs, because we gave video a pipeline and revenue target, and that created them to start thinking about how there were other forms of leveraging video that we already had that could help drive towards it. And YouTube was a great example of like an underutilized area for us. So that drove that focus. So I absolutely believe they have a place for creative teams as well. And I actually think that is kind of one of the ways in which you can tie those sorts of teams back to revenue and pipeline, which I think we're all trying to do more and more often.
Yeah, I love the fact that it gives everybody kind of a sense of accountability, but also an opportunity to kind of impact from wherever they are sitting, and a chance to impact the success of the company, because the goals go throughout the company. And I think for the same thing, for when you're a fairly intelligent, rational person, you also like to understand that you're building a cathedral and not just like putting in another brick in the wall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anders is asking something here as well, which I'll pull up. Which pitfalls, if any, have you experienced with OKRs? Marketing tends to be a very dynamic and creative environment. How do you think implementing OKRs have impacted the opportunity to act on spontaneous ideas?
Yeah, that comes back to my 80-20, which is the idea that 80% of the time we're focused on BAU and OKR initiative work, and then we have this 20% capacity, which is things will change and shift, and we do react to that, and we have creative a bit of like freedom to do whatever's required in order to allow ourselves to do that. So yeah, and that would happen in sprint planning. So those 2 bi-weekly sprints that we have, that's when that type of thing would come up, which would be like, we've seen this opportunity. It doesn't really sit within the OKR framework, but we strongly believe that there's something we should be doing here and we should act on it. And in those bi-weekly sprints, that's when we'd have that conversation and we'd say, yes, no, let's test it. Let's run it for this period. This is what the test will look like. And then, yeah, we'll kind of set it out in that. And that's where we'd roughly be able to see, because we do use Asana for this as well. This is not a pitch for Asana, but in the sprint board is roughly the allocation of tasks, like 80% core and 20% experimental. And that's what we try and keep ourselves like accountable from a task kind of split perspective.
Yeah. I think that 80-20% focus is so important to not fill up the employees' time completely just with the plans that you have made. Because like if you're wrong and then you've used all of your capacity on those ideas or those objectives that you set out and some of it didn't work out, well, the next time you're setting your objectives, then that little idea that employee had but managed to find time for it might be the one that slides in as a bigger part of the next OKRs.
Definitely.
I think that the same for like overall growth and contributing to revenue, that you need to exhaust all the opportunity you're sitting on, but you also need to continuously plant seeds that can kind of become the next growth lever for a company.
Definitely.
Are there any other advice that you've thought about OKRs, Alice, for marketing teams before this conversation interview that you felt like needed to be said?
I think I was thinking about this and I was saying how I probably wouldn't start with OKRs. I would start by just thinking about what do we want to achieve and what's going to be the best way for us to get there. And then rather than like starting to plan OKRs in a spreadsheet or Asana or wherever you choose, I would be thinking about, if I am going to go forward with OKRs as a framework, like what are the systems and the processes that need to accompany them to make them successful and make sure that they're actually adopted correctly so that we can follow through on it. Because I have had experience where if you just start with OKRs without the rest of the structure or the process or the cadence set up, they go nowhere and they live on a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint and like maybe semi-useful, but like they're not powerful. They're not used in the way they should be and they're not really powering your strategy. So that's one thing I would say, just as when I'm thinking about it, that's how I would be thinking. And then I would say, like, don't expect it to be a really easy exercise. Like you need to expect there to be a lot of iteration, that you're going to need to work really closely with everyone in the team to get them to the right place. You need time to really explain to them how they work, how the company and the marketing team are going to use them to drive strategy. And again, coming back to this idea of like, what's in it for them? Like what will the impact be for them and their career and also for the company? I would, just really recommend taking the time to kind of do that. And then not everyone will have the luxury of this, but a game changer for us is we have introduced, now that our team is like 30 plus marketers, we have a project manager and she is our Asana champion, but she's also tasked with like really running the OKR process, because I think the hardest part is not even the OKR setting up front, it's the consistent tracking, updating and making sure that we're all accountable, including myself, to like set out. And so having that role in seat has been incredibly beneficial. But if you don't have the luxury to have that person in seat, then just make sure there's time carved out in someone's workload that's going to be responsible for doing it. Because I think if you implement OKRs without some of those bits in place, then they will just fall flat.
Yeah, and it's like with most things, if you're not kind of consistent and kind of following up, then progression stops and it slips off people's radar at some point, I would guess.
Yeah, for sure.
If your company haven't used OKRs, so say you're a marketing leader like yourself and wanted to the whole organization to be using OKRs, kind of how do you do that pitch, or is it even possible if it's only you in marketing who wants to do OKRs to make it become a success?
Yeah, I would probably just start within marketing. I always think about if I want to make something bigger than what it is, how can I do that? And that is start with the controllable, which is probably your own department, and prove out success within your team. And then you use that as a case study for imagine what this could look like if we implemented it on an organizational level basis. So but the thing that I would be doing is socializing the concept consistently in my one-to-ones with all of my peer execs, but then also in like monthly reporting, quarterly reporting, like my weekly reports to the CEO, I would just constantly be saying, we've set these OKRs, this is the framework we're using, like consistently socializing that type of, the results you're getting, how you're using it, like what it's driving from a strategy perspective. And then people will get interested enough when you do that to want to understand more. And I think that always helps. So start in the controllable environment, prove success out there, and then continually socialize it among the rest of your execs and the CEO. And I think you'll probably make some traction.
It's very interesting now that I think about I've heard you talk about many different marketing related topics, and it seems like the way you start is that you always start building out small pieces of proof, like the same way where I think you have done your kind of shift from the lead gen focus to a demand gen focus, and that also started out with let's just have a small experimental budget just to create demand. So is that just kind of a way you operate to get your get your way in companies?
I would say it's the two things. It's starting in the controllable and proving something out, and then it's the socialization of it, because that was the other really important thing in the shift from lead gen to demand gen was like I didn't just have an experiment, prove success, and then have this big meeting and expect everyone to just buy into it overnight. I knew I needed to socialize it like consistently over time, showing the data, like without necessarily a pivotal meeting, so to speak. And then it's amazing how like organically stuff shifts when you do that. So I think that's just I don't know if that's just my psychological insight into how I think people work and like our kind of how I think people are mostly scared of change, and so gradual change and de-risking any form of change are like the two levers you have at your advantage for getting something to ultimately go in your favor. So maybe that's just like a bit of background in psychology that I've been leveraging to try move progress forward.
Do you actually study the psychology?
Only in when I think it was my A-levels, so a long time ago.
Okay.
I have snippets of that still in my brain.
Interesting. I think it's. I think I've seen it myself as well. When we pick out small things, and instead of having people to trust a slideshow, if you can actually bring real proof, whether that's like qualitative or quantitative, then it's much easier to get people to buy into it when you actually have the proof that what you're doing, what you believe is already working.
Definitely.
Cool, Alice. We're almost done now. I feel like there's so many more things that I want to ask you, but that might be an opportunity to invite you back in 6 or 12 months to continue the conversation. Is it for all companies to have 6 months OKRs? Should some have 12 months? Like I'm probably thinking smaller companies should probably go to quarterly OKRs. What's your opinion?
I feel like quarterly is always too short.
Okay.
Maybe you don't need to do it quarterly or bi-yearly, and it's like it's actually somewhere in between, like I don't know, a quarter and a half. But I do always think quarterly tends to always be too short, especially if you're doing the process properly. It takes time. So half yearly feels good for us, but maybe you want to do like 6-7 week cycles of them if you're a bit smaller. I wouldn't say quarterly. I think that is just too short a time period, regardless of size, probably.
How long is the actual period where kind of what is the run into the agreed OKRs? Is that a month's time, or how much do you spend?
I mean, I would say probably end to end full process. Yes, probably a month by the time we've done it from an exec team offsite. That's translated through to the department functions. Yeah, so you're looking at about a month's time.
Okay. Wonderful. Alex, I'll not steal more of your time. It's been really interesting and really impressive to hear how organized that you guys run things. Probably is a proof that you're not just lucky when you grow to plus 70 million euros in ARR, but there's actually a plan behind everything. If people want to reach out to you, or if they want to give Cognism a try, what's the path you want to put them on?
Yeah, reaching out to me, LinkedIn's probably the best place to grab me. And yeah, go and check cognism.com out if you want to learn more about B2B contact data, which is always very exciting stuff. Well, yeah, or reach out to me directly, and I can facilitate as well.
Wonderful. And for those who are listening to us today, if you like this conversation we had with Alice just now, go search for Attributed where you listen to podcasts, and there's actually more than 200 episodes that you can start to press play on. So thank you so much for listening today, and Alice,